Hey, lovely people, a pleasant Sunday afternoon to you. If you have not yet made Jesus Christ your personal Lord and Savior, please feel free to do so. He's the best being ever. Certainly that would be the best decision you could ever make. All right, so I'm looking at an article by one of my former lecturers, Dr. Orville Taylor, and it reads as follows. It is not that simple. I think it says DNA, nurture versus nature, and I suppose this is in light of the recent budget debate, and this whole, paternity fraud saga, that has been happening in somewhat of fairly recent times. And I figure there's some alliteration and metaphor and simile that will be garnered from reading this blog, or this, I would even call it a blog, this post by Dr. Taylor. It is not that simple. How does one determine who the real parent of a child is, especially when she's collecting her award at graduation? Is it the biological or the one who raised her? Indeed, DNA is dynamic. Therefore, environmental factors can trip some genes on and off. 4 spokespersons from Parliament entered into a master debate as they battled for the sympathies and index fingers of the electorate. A general election is due soon, and Don Anderson polls indicate that were it called now, it would likely be a narrow victory for the People's National Party, PNP. But elections are won on the day. And as stated multiple times, it is possible to win the national vote and still lose the elections. In other words, so even though the Don Anderson polls may state that the PNP would win, by a slight margin or moderately win on the day of the particular event, I should call it, the JLP can become victorious and be the ultimate winners and cap the prize a 3rd time consecutively. Success and failure are being passed across the aisle like a raffled child named a hoofer. Both the PNP and the governing Jamaica Labour Party JLP say our economic stability is their progeny. DNA analysis is not as conclusive as one would think. Jamaica is neither a failed state nor a failed economy. True, we have seen 3 consecutive quarters of economic contraction. Moreover, although accurately measured using methodologies honed by sociologists and demographers, the low employment rate obscures unemployment and does not capture the working poor. And if I'm reading what he's saying, even though it may be down from 18%, when the JLP took over in 2016 to 3.5% presently, the type of work we're talking, the low tier to mid tier, those are not effective jobs to drive forcefully an economy in a magnolious way, to grow it in a humongous way. Here is a sobering fact. There can be no boasting by any of the 2 parties in Parliament about the overall stewardship of the economy by either the incumbent or previous administrations by that party or the opposition. There is enough blame to go around because the people have been very promiscuous and have allowed multiple men to make a fool of them. And he's talking as it relates to politicians, after promises of doing better than the other man. And the cycle continued for more than 80 years after universal adult suffrage. Starting at independence, the fabled period of the 1960s saw sustained economic growth and expansion, led by initiatives from Industry Minister Robert Lightbourne and public servants, foreign investment and industrialization, followed a linear path. However, despite the trickle-down myth, which is not based on any solid economic theory or research, very little of the growth filtered downward. It's just vertical, It's not like neither. I don't know what goes down. I know you have vertical, you have horizontal. I never know what to say. Just downward. Downward, as the word says. True, Jamaica was not unique in this. However, Singapore, Lord, I'm smiling because, every time I remember that country, how they took our model, and they're basically a first world country now. Jamaica was not unique in this. However, Singapore looked at some of what we were doing, but recognized very early that it should take an approach of improving education at all levels. That is what the great Mia Motley has done. And that's why Barbados is where it is at today. Showing zero tolerance to corruption and build a society on equality and equity, two different words, equality and equity, as a platform upon which real development should take place. We dropped at least 2 balls. First of all, trickle down never takes place unless there are deliberate strategies involving empowerment of the poor, expansion of the middle class, and overall redistribution of some of the benefits of the sacrifices workers made. By the end of the 1960s, despite impressive economic growth, the social marginalization and the widening of the gap between upper and lower classes remained like Corrie stain. Fact. Researchers from the University of Sussex, what do you call this word again? SUSSX. Is it Sussex? Or I think something is silent. If I'm not calling it right, guys, forgive me. Institute of Development Studies, and among them Dudley Sears, lamented. Ooh, sorry, beautiful people, the whole of an eyes of the paper. So it goes. Lamented that development was much. Let me try and get this sorted up before. That development was much else besides economic growth. In Jamaica, growth and poverty increased side by side, with the latter as unwelcome as a blood relative who you would prefer not to visit when the middle class colleagues come for dinner. Oh dear. I know what they're saying. And that's a reality. It was increased social marginalization and economic deprivation of the working poor. So people who are just, as I said, a low tier to somewhat of a semi-mid tier job. Just basically working to go back to work or to pay your debts and bills, which swung them from the JLP's Alexander Bustamante, who had endeared himself to the working class as a labor leader. Too many promises were unfulfilled by 1971. See there? So it's not synonymous to our current leaders, my beautiful people. I've often heard that those leaders of the past, of whom I have no knowledge of, who probably died before I was born, had unfulfilled promises. Oh dear. The 1970s started nicely. However, unlike the present Prime Minister, who refuses to stridently oppose the American president, Michael Manley sought no approval for his relationship with Fidel Castro, the then president of Cuba. It certainly did not help. It did not help that Manley declared democratic socialism as the official doctrine of the government. Our current Prime Minister was only a toddler then. However, the senior citizens in his party can tell him firsthand how the petulance of the Jamaican leader created unmitigated American hostilities, yes, I heard of it, to the detriment of the Jamaican people. It is perhaps unfair, therefore, to judge the 1970s purely on the basis of internal policies of Manley's PNP, because there was no way in which a little Cuba would be allowed to succeed economically, as America demonstrated its manifest destiny as Manley fought. With the deliverance of 1980, led by Edward Seaga, and extremely friendly relations with the American Ronald Reagan administration, one would have reasonably expected a miracle after major concessions by the hitherto antagonistic International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, as well as Reagan's Caribbean basing initiative. One hardly would have expected that we would have failed an IMF test less than 3 years into the administration. After 7 years of anemic economic growth, Hurricane Gilbert came and destroyed the little benefits of an economic growth from that decade. Guys, you know what to do. Read TikTok and YouTube. Subscribe. Give me a like, and thank you.